is the author of the book Divider-in-Chief, The Fraud of Hope and Change. She has spent her career championing expanded liberty in America and impressing upon young people an understanding of the blessings of freedom. Katie Pavlich is my colleague at Townhall.com, where she serves as news editor. She's also a contributing editor to Townhall magazine and a Fox News contributor. She is the award-winning author of the New York Times bestseller Fast and Furious, Barack Obama's Bloodiest Scandal and Its Shameless Cover-Up. Crystal Wright is editor and publisher of a website called conservativeblackchick.com. Her goal is to get Americans thinking critically about who and what they are voting for on the local and national level. Crystal has written extensively on domestic policy as well as on foreign policy topics. And Rachel Campos-Duffy is the national spokesperson for the LIBRE initiative. She's also a television host, pundit, author, and mother of 6. Rachel is well known for discussing the hot topics of the day in her signature, honest, articulate, and down-to-earth style. And here's actually a very interesting note about Rachel. Did you guys see the news a couple weeks ago that Joy Behar is leaving The View? How dare you applaud a national tragedy like that? No, so they have to fill that seat. And there's legitimately a rumor out there that ABC is looking for a conservative Latina to fill that seat. Wouldn't it be awesome if Rachel becomes the next co-host of The View? Apparently she is one of the front runners. So that would be great. Please welcome our panel.
Well, let's get started. This week, or over the past couple weeks, there's been a lot of talk about Sheryl Sandberg's new book, Lean In. And, it's an interesting conversation because in her book, what she says is it's not really that women are being discriminated, and that's not why they're getting to the top of all the corporate ladders. It's that they're kind of doing it to themselves, that they're leaning out instead of in, that they're not being as aggressive as they could, that they're sort of hedging their bets and not really moving up in their companies because they're thinking about babies they might one day have. And so there's a lot of debate about that. Is it about that? Is there something to be said? I just wrote an article in today.com, todaymoms.com, called In Defense of Leaning Out. I certainly leaned out professionally to make the choice for a family and more balance in my life. So I want to talk about this because I seem to think that we're, as conservative women, a lot more tolerant of both the Sheryl Sandbergs and the Duggar family. We do the whole spectrum. We're sort of encompassing. I feel like the liberal side is a little less tolerant. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I think if you look at the liberal feminist movement, their ideal would be the corporate executive woman who actually chose not to get married and not to have children. That is their ideal. In fact, they would call marriage a comfortable concentration camp. And that sort of notion that only true joy can come through corporate success. And I think conservative women, as you see right here in a broad array of personal life choices, some of you are so young, you haven't made those choices yet, but those of us who've been around a while, we've made different choices, but we honor and value. And you know what? The fact that there are not as many women CEOs, Sandberg is right. Women are making choices. Some of them are choosing that they're going to go the route of not pursuing the CEO, perhaps pursuing mid-level management, or even choosing to stay home and raise their children. All are honorable, and I think it's important that conservatism reach out and embrace those different choices.
And I think, Kate, you hit the nail on the head. And this takes me back to the election, last year's election, when Ann Romney was vilified by liberals and the liberal press for choosing to lean out, right? We as conservatives celebrate women's choices and men's choices. And what I find ironic about the attack on Sheryl Sandberg, who is the CEO, well, she's the COO of Facebook, not CEO, of course, is that she's telling it like it is. She's telling women, if you want to put your foot to the gas pedal and rise up corporate America, it's not without sacrifice. Right. And she's telling it like it is, and she's being attacked by the liberal press for telling it like it is. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's kind of like, it reminds me of what liberal media does to blacks. They want to box us into what I call a black box. Mm-hmm. And what liberals want to do to women, they want to box them into, if you're not a career woman, you're not hard charging, you want to do it all, have the baby without the man, well, you're just nothing to us. Well, the fact is you can't have it all. Nobody can have it all in life. And I think that it really provokes a good discussion that we as conservatives can jump into, like you're doing, Rachel, and say, hey, women, we're actually the party for women.
Right. We are. Yeah. We are. In fact, you brought up an interesting point earlier backstage, Kate. Obama's attitude towards women. You say that he loves them when he needs them, and he kind of throws them under the bus when he doesn't. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think we could all jump in with great glee on this one. And that you look at even just the White House and how Obama actually treats the women within his White House. He doesn't pay them as much.
Right.
It's considered to be the boys' club. I think Christina Romer, who was his chief economic advisor, said she felt like a piece of meat in the White House. I know you didn't see that in a lot of news articles, particularly as the press was promoting the war on women mantra. They forgot to mention what was really happening. And that just is
in the midst of Benghazi, I mean, he pretty much threw Hillary and Ambassador Rice right under the bus. What do you guys think on that?
I think is most insulting as a female entrepreneur myself is that he went at last year's State of the Union, he said that he wants young people to become the next Steve Jobs. And he's not helping young people become the next Steve Jobs, particularly women. And related to the Sandberg topic, I think that the great thing about what conservative women do is they promote a hybrid style of entrepreneurship. So for example, my mother was a homeschooled mom, or homeschooling mom. She homeschooled 5 children. I think that's an entrepreneur in a domestic sense. And then there's an entrepreneur like Sheryl Sandberg, who is an innovator within an existing company. And then there's a third type of entrepreneur like Sarah Blakely, who took $5,000 out of her savings and built. She's the world's youngest billionaire, self-made, because she started this company called Spanx. So there's 3 different types of entrepreneurs out there. And I would like liberals and Obama to help promote all of them, including the domestic types.
And absolutely. I was going to mention, though, really quick, let's talk about the unemployment for young women. I mean, there are high. Is Obama good for the economy for young women like yourselves? Let's talk about that.
Well, we've seen too, I think the last election especially, this breakdown of women voters and this pandering to them as if they aren't a part of the whole economy. We do know that women who stay at home with their children actually are the ones who deal with the money and they make the household decision.
Right.
If the peanut butter costs $2 more at the grocery store, well, that's $2 less that are going to the next party or birthday celebration. So what I like about the conservative movement as a whole is we promote individual growth. So whether you want to be, as an individual, not as women or as mothers, but as individual females who can make a difference. And I feel like that's not something that's fostered by the Obama White House. Like you said, they use them when they want them. There's this expectation that if you stay home, my mother was also a hybrid. She had this high-powered career, gave it up to come stay at home, but then she started 2 small businesses and got to spend even more time with her children at home doing both. So we fostered that individual style of being a woman.
I always say that conservatives allow the women in their group and basically everybody to define feminism for themselves. Yeah. It's not some liberal construct. Speaking of demographics that did not do well under the Obama economy minorities. I know, for example, with Hispanics, there were 1 million more Hispanics who fell into poverty under the Obama administration. Maybe, Crystal, you want to talk a little bit about how African Americans have fared and, in general, on our message of inclusion and what we need to do moving forward.
Right. Well, it's very interesting that President Obama ran probably one of the most divisive identity politics campaigns in recent history, right? So he divided the electorate with race, gender, sexuality, everything under the sun, stay-at-home moms versus working moms, right? And with Black Americans, what we know is under President Obama, our wealth has diminished greatly. I mean, according to Pew Charitable Trust, we have the combined wealth for an average Black American family is about $5,000. You know what it is for a white family? $113,000. More foreclosures are hurting Black Americans. And I don't even want to get to the education gap. 73% of all Black babies are born to unwed mothers. So this president is not helping us, but I'm also disheartened by last year's election results. Mitt Romney won the highest vote of white voters since 1988. He got 69%, almost 70% of, 60% of all white voters. But it wasn't enough to put him over the top and win the presidency because he failed miserably with the black vote. 93% of black Americans, now I just listed you the economic state of black America, okay? The education gap is huge. I just went through all that. Yet, black Americans voted 93% overwhelmingly for them. We had 71% of Latinos and Hispanics, Asians as well. And I gotta tell you guys, we're missing the boat because the faces of the party, you have a bunch of great women up here. We represent diversity. But the people who are our messengers, who are working on Capitol Hill within our organizations, and our candidates, frankly, do not reflect the changing face of America. We know within the next several decades, America is going to be predominantly a minority society. Minorities are going to take over the demographics. So we've got to do better, and I just want to mention, I got really sick and tired over the last 20 years of hearing people talk about the problem with diversity, so I decided to do something about it. I formed a political action committee about a week ago called the Conservative Melting Pot, and it's designed to get behind candidates and support candidates who are diverse in that they look like the America that we've now become, and they're going to take the message of conservatism, which is a winning message, to all Americans in every corner of this country. So I hope you check it out. It's conservativemeltingpot.com. But we can no longer, and I just want to end with this because this is I think this is something everybody needs to hear. We are perceived as the party of white voters. We are perceived as the party run by white men. And you guys, you see what I see, okay? And we have got to do better. We've got to cast the net wide. And it's not about lesser than, it's about casting the net wide. Just because somebody is a minority candidate doesn't mean we're going to change the message. It means we're taking the message to all Americans because we need to unite and we need to take our country back.
Absolutely.
And Rachel, it's tough because conservatives don't think that way. They don't think in terms of identity politics.
That's right.
Frankly, to our credit that we don't instinctively think that way. But you look at the election outcome and how we have to be more intentional about this if we want to bring more to our cause. For instance, I would argue the exact same point with women. Highest poverty rate in a generation, 40% of single moms are at the extreme poverty rate. That is ridiculous. And we didn't talk a lot about that. And also look at the Republican National Convention compared to the Democrat National Convention. I think virtually 90% of the speakers at the Democrat convention were women.
Except that you have to admit they get away with things that we don't get away with.
Do.
So they have a night devoted to women and women's rights, and they don't seem to see the irony that Bill Clinton was the keynote speaker that night.
Worse.
Right?
Okay,
but
right.
Glorifying Ted Kennedy, who left a woman to drown in his car
Exactly.
the next day.
But guys, Okay, that I agree with you.
I agree, but listen,
it's the visual, right?
At
the same time, they're putting out, and we have Nikki Haley, we have Susanna Martinez, we had Alan West, Senator Scott, Bobby Jindal. We got the diversity, folks, but we're not putting it out there. We're not leaning into the American people.
Well, Crystal, I have a question for you. We often get hit back though with the argument of, well, these are just you're a token woman.
Oh yeah, well,
I've been called a token.
No, I'm actually a coon.
So how do you
that's what liberals
that narrative, though? Because we are constantly on the defensive instead of the offensive in that approach. So how do you
fight it? You just fight. Here's what. Let me tell you how you fight it. And I'm just going to give you an example. I talked to a great young girl, and I'm going to mention her name, Chelsea Smith. She's here at CPAC. She came out to me. I said, "How do you like the shows, Chelsea? How do you find it, Crystal?" It's more diverse than ever, and I'm so excited about seeing so many young black people. I feel like there's more young black people at CPAC this year than ever, and I feel like I belong. That's how you fight it. You see what I'm saying? And Katie, you're young. You're a
woman.
Right, but she's young, she's a woman. Yeah. Many people would say, how can you be a Republican, right? I think it's just about us getting out there and evangelizing, right? On the local level.
Pushing forward those people that are such strong leaders in the black community, like Dr. Ben Carson and Harry Arnold and who's the other one? Niger Innes. There's so many out there that I feel like don't have such a high profile.
Right, we ought to be profiling them. We ought to be putting them out. We ought to be showing, some of it is messaging, some of it is image, but I'm going to tell you what, in the Latino community, a lot of it is tactical. In the Latino community, the left has had free reign in terms of community organization in our communities. Our voices are not heard. I work for an organization called the LIBRE Initiative. We are starting to put these roots down in the ground, but these are not get out the vote efforts. They cannot be get out the vote efforts. They have to have deep roots. They have to have lots of funding, and they have to be able to exist permanently. And we can start to change that. One thing we don't do very well is we don't promote the policies that they love.
Yeah. Right.
So in my community, we love school choice.
And so do we.
In
my community too.
So do we.
And we can't just say, hey, we promote school choice.
Right.
We need to point out the hypocrisy on the other side. Obama sends his kids to private school.
Right.
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton sends her kids to public school, and they are blocking the door for other minorities and economically disadvantaged children to have equal access to a good education. That is a civil rights issue, and we ought to say it like it is.
And that's an issue, too, that a lot of different people from different political backgrounds can agree on.
Yes.
So finding issues that not only go across demographics, but also political points of view. There
Absolutely.
are a lot of liberals and Democrats who also believe in school choice. So why is that something that they're not voting for when it comes to
Well, and I live in the District of Columbia, one of the worst school systems. It ranks at the bottom of all the states, right? And when you talk about school choice and vouchers and all the stuff that that Republicans protect and promote, when you go to black communities and talk to blacks about it and don't put labels on it, they say, yeah, that's for me because I'm trying to escape the squalor of the school system in the District of Columbia. And if you look back in history, I read recently a great book by David Barton, and it's called American History in Black and White. You know what he said? Democrats were keeping blacks, trying to trap blacks in failing schools before, leading up before the civil rights, passage of the civil rights. And now they still have blacks in failing schools because all the cities, District of Columbia, Chicago, Detroit, led by what? Democrat mayors, keeping what? Black kids in awful failing schools. And what happened before civil rights? You had Southern racist Democrats keeping blacks in segregated failing schools.
So tell me this though, why is it that we look at the poverty rate in the African American community, we look at the unemployment level, which is higher in the African American community, we look at the bad schools that African American children are trapped in, and we have the first African American president, we have all these fatherless, and all the consequences of that in the community. He's not taken that up as they've taken up obesity. I haven't seen them take up an issue that has a lot more, deep-rooted consequences, and they are a perfect family to do that. But tell me why the African American community does not hold him accountable for those statistics.
I think a lot of it, I'm sad to say this, there's two things at play. He's the first black president. He has his surrogates going out there. You have celebrities telling people to vote for the president simply because he's black. And then on the flip side, and you're right, I've written a lot about this on my blog, that Michelle Obama and the president are an intact black family. She's very concerned about her daughters, her education, the education of her daughters, how they're being raised as young girls, and yet she won't take up the high rate of unplanned pregnancies plaguing. It's really our demise. It's one of our biggest demise. But I also think we as conservatives, people like me, people like Chelsea I spoke to you about, just like you said that Hispanics respond to, like, they want to latch on to something at the grassroots level, the message. That's what blacks want. They want foot soldiers in their neighborhoods who look like them and just say, hey guys, I'm going to talk to you about education, entrepreneurship, and keeping more of the money you earn. And then that's going to make a black American scratch their head and say, like Susanna Martinez says, honey, I think we're voting for the wrong
I'll
party.
Be darned.
But I think some of it really goes back to, where did we lose over the last 40 plus years since the civil rights movement? We have lost touch with black Americans and the budding Hispanic, and we have no relationships, and it can't be a one-off. It just cannot be every 4 years.
One of the things that we haven't acknowledged is that conservatives and Republicans have been so deeply vilified. They have been demonized. So it's not just we're not fighting on an ideological playing field here. We have a president who has sought to turn Republicans and conservatives into the enemy. So when it comes, I mean, he actually tries to convey that we Republicans hate black people, that we want to drag women kicking and screaming back to the 1950s, that we can't stand immigrants again and again. And yet we conservatives still are out there arguing the issues, thinking everybody's listening to us. Well, actually, Obama's goal is to shut us down, to turn everybody off to listening to us so he can just ram through a radical agenda. We've got to point out the hypocrisies, exactly what you talked about. But with women as well, there are vast hypocrisies. Yes. You think about every time I hear Obama says they want to put the government in between you and your doctor. Well, that's exactly what Obamacare does. It puts a government panel, not just a government panel in between us and our doctors. They want to take away our right to equalize ourselves with men by taking away our right to bear arms, particularly to bear a semi-automatic weapon, which I need, frankly, with my weak little arm.
Me too. The laws that are put in place, like such as gun control laws, I heard Eric Holder say that he wants to use gun control as a way to help, quote, actually help young black men. Well, that is the worst possible, I mean, falsehood you could imagine, because gun control law has historically been used to control minorities and particularly the weakest parts of our society, such as the black community or women. We need to have tools to defend ourselves, and it's not true when they say they're trying to help us.
And Katie, you've written quite a bit on guns and women and so Fast and Furious is really fascinating to me because as a Hispanic woman, I know that the people who suffered the most from Fast and Furious were Mexicans, Mexican citizens and Hispanic Americans living on the border. Tell me why that wasn't used, why we didn't talk about that more in the Hispanic community. I saw some commercials on Latino TV, but not a lot.
Yeah, at the same time that President Obama was campaigning and saying that he's for the Hispanic community, will provide them with what they need, he wasn't condemning an attorney general who denies a program that even existed, sending what President Obama would call military-grade assault weapons to the most violent criminals in North America.
Killed thousands of people.
Thousands of people dead, thousands of people will die in the future as a result. And we see this now with the gun control debate as a whole. I just find it very interesting that these criminals who go into birthday parties with 14-year-old kids and kill everyone in the room because they have a problem with their father or their mother, but women like us aren't allowed to have more than 7 rounds in our handgun to defend against a violent attacker coming into our home. The average home invasion is 2 to 3 people. You have Joe Biden out giving us advice, just blow 2 blasts on your front porch. I know Wayne LaPierre touched on this earlier, but he's giving us not only advice that will possibly get us killed because now we no longer have ammunition in our firearm to defend against
we're also
ourselves.
flat on our back on the ground.
Also go to jail. And then lately we've seen these ridiculous suggestions about how women should defend themselves from universities saying, maybe you should urinate on yourself and your attacker won't stop you. I saw someone vomit on your attacker. Use a ballpoint pen to fight back against your attacker. The Brady campaign. Use a call box. And I want to tell Amanda Collins' story right now because I'm sure some of you have heard her story on Fox News and NRA News as well. But she was a young woman, had a concealed carry permit. Parents brought her up to learn how to defend herself. She was held at gunpoint in a gun-free zone on her college campus and brutally raped 50 feet from the campus police station. And she knew no one at the police station was going to come get her because they all went home and were off duty. Now, she didn't carry her concealed weapon that day because she was abiding by university policy. And her quote that everyone's been reciting is that she was legislated into being a victim. And why we're taking away this great equalizer from women to defend themselves against a violent attacker. To me, the Second Amendment isn't just a Second Amendment right, it's a human right. Defending your life is a human right. It's not a Second Amendment right. And I always say, too, the NRA has been accused of racism and accused of lots of other things, but I say the organization that really stands up for women's rights is the NRA, not now.
Absolutely.
It's interesting. Has the women's movement, as an establishment, have they come out at all on this issue in the studies and research
actually,
you've done?
the Independent Women's Forum sent an op-ed that was pro-self-defense, I like to say, to Glamour magazine, and the response from Glamour magazine was that it was just being put out there as a submission to cause outrage, and so that was something.
Stop buying Glamour magazine.
Yeah, stop buying Glamour magazine or buy Glamour magazine and hire new people to write for it.
And after that, after Amanda's beautiful testimony, that anybody who watched it would have been brought to tears.
Sure.
In Colorado, you have Joe Salazar, the representative, saying that women can't really be trusted to know when they're in danger. They might whip out their gun and
Just
pop and kill people. And then you had the Democrat senator lecturing a woman on the fact that, well, if you're attacked and you have a gun, pretty much there's nothing you can do about it anyway, so we're going to take away your right to carry an arm on campus. Look, we have got to point out that these are Democrats attacking the right of women to defend ourselves. That is flagrant hypocrisy when it comes to caring about women's rights.
Yeah, they say they're about choice. Women always say they're about choice, but if you really believe in choice, then let one woman use a dog or pepper spray or an alarm system, and another woman who's very proficient with a gun use her tool of self-defense, which could be a gun, or it could be what most murders are more than guns, a hammer. Like more people are actually killed with hammers. So should we just let women use whatever they prefer and are most comfortable with?
Well, I think we should go back to the United States Constitution, and
Good
I don't
idea.
think Democrats can cherry pick and interpret the Second Amendment to be different than equal rights for all Americans, and that applies to women as well. And what's interesting about the left, and like Kate said, we need to be pointing this out. You mentioned the congressman in Connecticut, Salazar, saying that women.
Colorado.
Colorado. But he was saying all sorts of preposterous stuff,
disgusting.
treating women in a very paternalistic manner. We have the right to bear arms and defend ourselves, but at the same time, Democrats, it's okay for women to get equal pay. They want women treated equally in the workplace. All these equal. But when it comes to the Second Amendment, you little women aren't, woman enough to handle a gun.
Yeah.
And back to something that Katie said about the president and gun violence affecting black men. Really, if the president was concerned about the predominance of more blacks being in prison, I think it's a rate of 6 to 1 black men compared to white men, young white men. What he would do and his wife is focus on the breakdown of the black family, because black on black crime is also decimating black Americans, and it's because they don't have a mom and a dad, the disintegration of the family. And back to Rachel's point on messaging in the Republican Party, we have the winning message. When you grow up in a 2-parent household, I'm talking traditional marriage, folks, and we need to start fighting for it. We need to start fighting for these values that make America great and people great. When you grow up in a 2-parent household, your chances of sinking into poverty are probably less than 10%, okay? When you grow, Brookings did this, and Mitt Romney talked a lot about this to the NAACP when he gave that great speech last year. According to Brookings, if you're born in a family with one parent, which is usually a mom for many black Americans, your chances of diving into poverty rise to 70%.
Right.
Right?
And there is no government program, I don't care how well run, how well intentioned, that comes even close as a substitute to a 2-parent family. The kinds of well-intentioned things that our government is trying to do and so why aren't we promoting marriage? And why isn't the President of the United States, who is so clearly and so obviously a perfect conduit for this message, not doing it? It's really disappointing. I talk about it as an American, talk about it as a minority woman. Why isn't he doing more of it?
But I think we need to start pointing that out more. Kate has talked about this. You've talked about this. I bet all of us up here are products of great parents, right?
Yep.
We're not. None of us just popped into the world and poof, turn into the people we are on this stage, or you all sitting in this audience. And it goes back to, that we just, like you said, we got to we have to stop apologizing for conservatism and defend it, people. I just really believe that whether you're talking about a minority or a white person, all of us have talked about these value-centric policies and things that are just, they work, right?
That's right.
Things that work that your grandma told you about.
Yeah.
Right.
And your mom and dad.
Well, and they say all the time, there's all this hand-wringing, within the movement of, how do we reach women and how do we reach, and you're right, I think, you talk about women, whether they're Hispanic women or not, you touch them by talking about what they care about. They care about their families, so they're gonna care about education. They're gonna care about school choice. There's so many issues that are on our side.
Also, too, pointing out the fact that they have been lied to. You just brought up that government programs cannot replace a mom and a dad in a home.
That's right.
But they have been sold and told that it can. And so going into these kinds of communities and talking about the fact that they have been lied to for decades, this is why it's about control, and this is the way that you don't have to repeat this deadly cycle of violence and poverty for the next 50 years to come.
Yeah, and then to play off of one thing that you just said with related to the gun control issue is you were saying that the Second Amendment is a human right.
Yes.
And I think that could work with pretty much all of the first 10 amendments. The Bill of Rights acknowledge our natural rights, the rights that we know we have because we're rational human beings. And so it doesn't matter if President Obama declares the Second Amendment unconstitutional, we have that right because we're a human being. And I think that's a way maybe we could talk about these issues differently and reach out to minorities, is to say, you have certain rights because you're a human being. It's not because you're a Republican or a Democrat. It's because you're a human.
Yep.
And just talk about it in that way, and it's maybe less controversial.
And how do you talk about it? I think that we could do a lot better of telling stories, right? At LIBRE, our executive director has this great video that he did. It's called My American Experience, and it tells the story of, and I'll tell you what, every Mexican American and anybody who has an immigrant background in this country has these stories, right? Of his father coming, they worked in the fields as a family, he bought a motel, they worked after hours to clean up the motel and get it going, and then it turned into another motel. And, there's this great visual of his father, an older man now, and he says, in America, you only need 3 things. You need God, good credit, and liberty. And I thought it was a great line too. And this story, every one of us knows this story. And I always talk about this in going back to reaching out to Hispanics. We need to tell these stories visually. This is a beautiful video. If you want to look it up, it's wonderful. It's Daniel Garza, An American Experience. But we need to tell these stories in our family. I know the Hispanic family is very matriarchal, and so goes the mom, so goes the family. And, I can tell you from my own family, there are divergent paths. There are those who chose the path of self-reliance and education and hard work and sacrifice. And there are those who, through not bad intentions, but started to see, it's very easy when you're poor and you feel disenfranchised to go for that self-reliance, and it's a slow process, but you become dependent, and what happens is there's a ceiling, and what we need to do is tell the stories, because the government and dependency can only take you so far, and there's a ceiling, and your own hard work and your own perseverance, it's limitless. And I think that's what Obama has done so effectively, is he has sold millions of Americans on the fact that the American dream is dead. Right. And I think that's part of it.
Well, I think that there's that, but it goes back to your story that you just talked about. And when my mom was growing up, and my grandfather, my grandfather has a great story of an immigrant. He came from the West Indies, big family of like 10, 12 from St. Kitts. He came to the United States, settled in Richmond, Virginia, married my grandmother, my mom's parents. He started a dry cleaner. He had a high school education. My grandmother didn't even finish high school. And he and my grandmother, she was a seamstress in the dry cleaners in Richmond, Virginia, put 3 kids through college. And you know what my mom told me? There was never a question in her family whether they were going to go to college, because it was the American dream. Right. This is a black family in the South. And what's happened, how we've somehow, the government dependency that Obama is peddling, and Democrats, because let's be honest, it's not just Obama. Right. It happened after the Civil Rights Act. they've been pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. And what we've seen is a declining, the black race has been economically going downward ever since, not just blacks, but others as well. Because when you buy into the government mentality, what you see is you're only going to get so much. You're not going to get the big house in the suburbs. Mm-hmm. You're not going to realize the American dream. Right. And to your point, we need to start telling these stories, right? These rich stories of history. And we also need to start talking about things without labels, leading with, like you said, education, liberty, freedom, entrepreneurship. When we talk about issues, I can tell you when I've spoken to people, predominantly liberal crowds, at the end, I have a lot of young minorities come up to me afterwards and they say, Crystal, wow, I feel like I can come out of the closet because I really feel this way. People shouldn't feel like they're closeted. They shouldn't be closeted conservatives, right?
But Crystal, part of it's not, and it isn't just, this isn't a message just for minorities.
No.
Because our schools do not tell the stories, right, of America's founding.
No.
And so these are, explaining history, explaining, these are things that need to be done, not just in minority communities.
No, I agree.
Right. We've got liberal indoctrination camps, really, from preschool all the way through college and postgraduate work. Mm-hmm. So we have to realize that particularly, I'm going to go back to women, when women graduate, having gone through freshman orientation program, which is an obscenity in and of itself. Don't ever let your children go through those programs. They go through that. Then they have these women's studies programs, women's centers, who teach them that they are exactly the same as men, by the way, and that all their needs and desires are the same, and that marriage is something to either be put off or avoided at all costs. Then they get out into the world determined to find evidence of sexism everywhere they turn. There is this deep hostility, and then you've got Barack Obama coming in saying Republicans hate women. I mean, you have Sheila Jackson Lee saying the next thing Republicans want to do is drag women's bodies out of clinics and stand over their bodies screaming in the streets. She literally said this. And she can say that because Obama is creating this mantra of a war on women, and young women buy into it. Look, we have got to aggressively go after those young women by showing that, yes, we believe in traditional marriage, absolutely, but going back to the very beginning, we embrace different choices. Right. We've got a lot of single women within our movement who have been very successful, have raised families. Gosh, I think or married women who have embraced careers. I think of Michelle Eastman, Bae Buchanan, Margie Ross, so many of these women who have achieved this great with very different choices from that notion that Democrats want everyone to think, that we believe women. In fact, there was a focus group. What do you think of women who are undecided? What do you think Mitt Romney thinks about women? You went around the room, and after listening to the media for a little while, the answers were he doesn't like women. He doesn't think women should work. He doesn't believe in birth control. He thinks women, and there is this, it should be back in the kitchen. Well, we need to realize this is a very real stereotype, and it has entered the national psyche. Right. We've got to aggressively counter that. You don't counter that. We wanted to talk a little bit about the birth control, the mandate. Mm-hmm. Well, when that mandate was put forward, it's as though Republicans just went tumbling into the trap, enabling the whole war on women mantra. I don't recall much of the Republican response, but I do remember one press conference with some white male clergy explaining why it's such a bad thing. And they were absolutely right, because it's a violation of our religious freedom. That is the essence. Mm-hmm. But that allowed the Democrats to say, aha, they don't want women to have birth control. I told you, look at all these old white guys standing up there saying you shouldn't have birth control. Put a bunch of young women out there saying, don't violate my religious freedom rights.
But
Kate,
wait, but this is important. Everything you said is right, and women, we are empowered, and especially in the conservative movement, but it's not helpful when you have old white men, Kate, talking about women's health issues within the conservative movement.
That is my point. That's your point. That is my entire point. I think we should have had a press conference of women out there. That is, I want to make sure everybody gets that. That is my point. That was a complete failure. And there is a sense of tone deafness sometimes in Congress, among our leadership. put the great women leaders, and we've got
Yes.
a lot of them in
so
Congress.
many of them. There's
put
Sandra.
them forward.
We've got Sandra Fleck out there who calls herself a lawyer but doesn't understand the Constitution, and she calls herself a reproductive rights activist, but clearly doesn't understand biology. I think it's highly offensive to women when she's telling women, oh, safe sex is using birth control. Do you know that Vogue just reported that 1 in 4 teenage girls has an STD?
Yeah, it's just
An unplanned pregnancy could end positively in adoption, but if you have an STD, that's going to ruin your life forever. So Obamacare is sexist because it puts guys off the hook. A guy who pressures a girl to get pregnant, all he has to do is say, oh, that's not my fault. You should have been using Obama's free birth control.
Yeah.
So, like...
Go take the morning after pill.
Yeah.
We need to put role models out there who are teaching women the truth about biology and freedom and the Constitution.
And are explaining that we as a movement actually honor and value and support women. We don't believe in the life of Julia where women are going to be dependent on the beneficent hand of government from cradle to
grave. And the government, right, and government is the father, the husband, and every answer to a woman's prayer, the big paternalistic government. Right. You know, and I think to your point about contraception, what's so troublesome about that whole war on women last year that Democrats were waging is that we were reduced to our vaginas.
Right.
No, people, really. The Democrats, did you hear me?
Right.
The Democrats reduced women to their vaginas because, oh, we know all y'all care about is birth control. Well, no. And I don't need somebody telling me how, you know, we need to be empowering women through talking about abstinence to treating ourselves with self-respect. Young women need to see role models and know that they are in control of their bodies and their sex. That's what it is. And they're more than their lady parts, as you know, I know Michelle Malkin talked about this. We're a brain, we're a whole vessel, just like a man. Would you ever tell a man, would you ever talk penis talk to a man when you talk about contraception?
Crystal, you are not supposed to say that word.
No, I'm serious though. I mean, sorry, I know I'm trying to.
I think what Crystal's getting at is that we need to also, as a movement, as a conservative
it's objectifying women.
It is. And as a movement, I think what we need to do is start redefining feminism. And we need to make sure, starting with school choice at the very beginning, right? Making sure that we have options, that we're not just sending our kids to government-run schools and hoping for the best, all the way up to picking, universities. Georgetown, why are good Catholic parents sending their money to Georgetown? I mean, so we need to be more conscious of what we're doing. I think we're talking about a new kind of feminism.
Yeah, I think we are.
Also, I think a big part of that we're leaving out is how do you go about changing the narrative on that? And the fact is that Glamour magazine is read by more women than the New York Times. And culture does trump politics when it comes to the way that the culture is shaped and the way people think. And so on the optics, yes, when you're going to hold a first press conference about the contraception mandate, it might be about religious freedom, but guess what? Start thinking about what the left is going to attack you on, and you know it's going to be. You know it's going to be that you hate women. That's something we could have seen coming from a mile away. Have the press conference with the young women who disagree. The talk show should have the same age woman on. Sandra Fluck, who disagrees from
better with guns. They did better with guns, right? We saw
they did. They learned a lot. And Glenn Reynolds from Instapundit wrote this great op-ed about how maybe super PACs should stop spending so much money on worthless TV ads and buy a couple women's magazines to start training and talking about, because in these magazines they don't state please vote for Barack Obama.
No.
When they do their spread of powerful women, who do they have? Michelle Obama,
Hillary Clinton.
Latina magazine is just about an arm of the DNC. There's absolutely no doubt.
So you have to think about it also in bigger terms than Washington D.C. and policy. You have to think about the other side, and you have to think about how it affects everyone culturally.
And you have to think about it, to Katie's point, in this new environment of Hollywood that's dominating politics, very much so, as well as the culture, right? Our social culture, social media. And Republicans, it's like we've gotten into this brand of being stodgy and old, guys, and we're more than that. We just so much more than that. And there are celebrities who are conservatives. So we need to do the playbook and do it better than they're doing it. And we need to have women, minorities, celebrities doing fun things and making conservatism sexy. Yeah. Because it is. It's actually really cool to keep more of your money.
Buy those new shoes.
And make babies.
Women's issues, I think one thing that we could do as women is stop using the left's terms and calling these issues women's issues. They're not women's issues, they're freedom issues, and we need to get guys in the discussion too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because when you call them women's issues, it's like
Marginalizing
the
them.
WNBA games or something. Guys, check out.
Yeah, there's some truth to that.
Hey, the one thing I want to add to this discussion that we need to point out in terms of hypocrisy of the left, particularly the women's movement, is that the great tragedy that's happening around the world in the real war against women, and that is in the name of Islam.
Absolutely.
And the attacks on women that, frankly,
Absolutely.
Obama won't talk about.
Absolutely.
You know, you've got women. This administration's goal is to promote abortion on demand internationally. Okay, we have women who cannot step outside their front door because they are so persecuted. Unless they have a man with them, or they're covered from head to toe, or they'll be stoned, or
they're having forced abortions in China.
Forced
Right.
abortions and you have Joe Biden running around saying he completely understands. But look, there are genuine oppressions of women happening all over the world. And this is a great opportunity for conservatives to stand up and champion those women who are oppressed in the name of a horrific extremist branch of the religion.
Absolutely. I can't. I think that's such a phenomenal point. And again, hold the women, the establishment women's movement accountable.
Yeah, do you ever hear
for
now
ignoring
going
them.
after
there's
Islamists around the world?
Who did it? Laura Bush. She got no credit for it. They didn't care.
That's
when
right.
she did it. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, unholy alliance going on there.
Absolutely. Well, we're coming near the end of our time here, so I want to, if anybody has any last minute thing they really wanted to get out there.
Great shoes. That's what I'm saying. We are women. We like that.
Everybody agreed on my shoes. Well, let's see. Let's switch it up. Switch it up. We have another minute or two. Come on, Kate.
Oh, me. Oh, let's see.
Come on.
Well,
Can we get into it over
I'm going to probably just beat this over the head just because that's how I am. But,
Do it.
But I think we all talked, it's not about women's issues, minority issues.
Right.
I think the reason why we're at CPAC, it's about our issues and really I would say not changing the message, but putting a fresh, almost different face on conservatism. Yeah. And really, that's what look at all of us in this room. Look at all of us on this stage. We are diverse. So let's celebrate and push that out, and let's get more people in the party that represent America. America is changing, guys. Right. And I got to tell you, I haven't been here 2 days. I think some of us are still in denial, and I know some of you don't want to hear this. But we have got to do better getting our message out to not just a select few, people who all look the same. We have got to do better, or you can expect to keep losing. And I, for one, am not going to make that happen.
Hey, Crystal.
Because, wait a minute, just one final thing. I told somebody that nobody owns the conservative movement. We all own it together.
The one thing I want to say is, you know what, when African Americans or women or Latinas get out there and they champion the conservative cause, they will be attacked more viciously than anyone.
Yes.
So it's incumbent upon all of us to stand up and have their back.
Yes.
Thank you. So get out into other venues, not just CPAC, everywhere else. Katie, Kate, Crystal, Katie, thank you for making this a fun panel.
Thank you.
Check this.
Good job.